Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Big Think live webinar. Today's topic is mindful isolation, how to prioritize your mental health and happiness. I couldn't think of a more appropriate topic to discuss right now. My name is Derek Beres. I've been a Big Think columnist since 2012. I've written about Buddhism very often for the site over a number of years during that time. I actually have a background in religious studies from Rutgers University, where my emphasis was on Buddhism and specifically how Buddhist concepts are translated when they come from the East into American culture. So I think today's guest is somebody who has really led in that discussion for many decades now, and I'm very excited to talk to her. Our guest is Sharon Salzberg. She co-founded the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts with Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein in 1974. She has an emphasis on Vipassana and metta methods of meditation, and she is the author of numerous books, including the New York Times bestseller, Real Happiness, The Power of Meditation, a 28-day program. We're going to shrink that 28 days now into the next hour. So for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing a number of topics. Half of that time will be devoted to Q&A from the audience. So if you have questions, whatever channel you're using right now, please drop it in the chat and I'll get fed those questions as we progress. And stay around for the whole time, because at the very end, Sharon is going to lead a meditation for us, which I think is going to be very appreciated at this moment in time. So thank you for joining, Sharon. We appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
So the term mindfulness has been around for a while, but it has so many different connotations. And sometimes it's so ubiquitous in our culture now that people sometimes have trouble understanding what that even really entails. So I would love if you can begin with a bigger picture overview of what mindfulness is.
Sure. Well, the word is used in a lot of different ways, so it could reasonably be described differently. A very classical sense of mindfulness is a quality of awareness where our perception of what's happening in the moment is not so distorted by old fears, projection into the future. And here's a perfect example, right? How many of us are not just with the difficulty, turmoil, chaos right now, but we're also adding this tremendous projection into a pretty dismal future. And actually, we don't know what the future holds, but we're trying to bear it all at once. And so we feel kind of desperate about that. So it's a way of being with our experience, whether it's pleasant or really painful, or even somewhere in between, that's forging a different relationship than what we're used to, because we're used to adding so much future projection, or there's some things we just don't like to feel. We think, I shouldn't have this anymore. I myself have been meditating you were nice enough not to bring this up in the introduction, for 70,000 years, almost 50 years. And, and it's a common thought, like, I shouldn't have this anymore. I've been meditating all this time, or spent all that money in therapy just last year. Why is it still here? And so there are many things we experience that we try to block. There are many things we feel ashamed of. There are many things we just get overwhelmed by. And so mindfulness is really talking about the same stuff may be happening, but we can be different with it.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the duration of meditation. I remember when I lived in New York, it's probably about 15 years ago, I took a workshop with Sally Kempton, who had just come out of living in the ashram and was now back teaching meditation after, I think, 28 years. And somebody asked her, when you get to that place in meditation where it's just complete Zen and silence, how long does it last? And Sally looked and she goes, about 2 seconds.
Great. Exactly.
And I think that's really important. Well, let's go back 50 years for a moment to start with. What brought you to meditation in the first place?
Well, it was a combination of things, some of which I don't understand, but I was a college student at State University of New York at Buffalo, and I took an Asian philosophy course as a sophomore. And really, honestly, as far as I can tell looking back, it was kind of like happenstance. Like, oh, that's on Tuesday. That fits nicely into my schedule. And the course completely changed my life in a couple of different ways. One was in the section on Buddhism, when they talked about, as the Buddha talked about so often, there is suffering in life. I felt just lit up by that. I, like many people, had come from a very turbulent, traumatic childhood, and like for many people, mine was a family system which was never ever spoken about, and so I didn't know what to do with all of those feelings inside of me. And so when I heard that in the context of the Buddhist teaching, it didn't seem depressing to me at all. It seemed liberating, like, oh, I'm not so weird. I'm not so different. I don't have to feel so marginalized by life. This is a part of life. It's not meant to say that life is only terrible by any means, but this is a part of life. So that was important for me. And then I heard in the context of that class that there were methods you could actually use called meditation. And if you did them, you could be a whole lot happier. So I wish I could package what happened next, because it's a mystery to me. Like, I don't know. Why didn't I think that sounds interesting? Maybe I'll go to graduate school and study comparative religion. I don't know. I just thought, I've got to learn. I've got to learn how to do this. And I looked around Buffalo. This is 1970. And I didn't see it anywhere. And the school had an independent study program where if you created a project that they liked, you could go anywhere in the world, theoretically, for a year, and then come back. So I created a project. I said, I want to go to India and study meditation. And they accepted it. So off I went.
Now that was, again, I mean, you had trouble finding it. Now I live in Los Angeles and it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But how have you seen the landscape of meditation change during that time? You were so instrumental in helping to bring it here in the first place. Why do you think it has proliferated in the way that it has?
Well, it's changed enormously. In that, when I came back, actually, I did stay longer than a year, admittedly, in India. And I went back to Buffalo, did what I needed to do to end up with 2 years of independent study credit. And then I went back to India. So I finally came back in 1974 as a teacher, because one of my own teachers had told me to teach. And in those days, if I was at a party or some social situation and somebody would say, as we do, what do you do? I'd say, I teach meditation. And they would kind of like go, oh, it's a little weird. Or occasionally somebody would say to me, well, did you meet the Beatles over there? And I say, no, sadly, they went when I was in high school. Also, it was a different tradition. But anyway, and now the most common comment, and it seems even funny, it's such a strange time when similes and metaphors don't hold. It's like, were I to be in a social situation, and people ask, what do you do? And I say, I teach meditation. The most common response is usually, I'm so stressed out, I could use some of that. And there's just been this enormous change, I think, partly because of the pioneering work of people like Jon Kabat-Zinn, who took the methodology and brought it out of the realm of, say, Buddhism or other ways of describing it, and brought it into science and the science of stress reduction. And then there was research which verified the efficacy of using these techniques, at least to some extent, verified it. And it's a whole different world now.
Right. And I think that, well, what do you think are from your understanding, the general real take home benefits of meditation? Again, that word is so ubiquitous as well that
Yeah.
I think people sometimes get confused with what they're even searching for. So what
Yeah.
would you advise meditation for overall?
Yeah. Well, I'm using it myself, of course, in these times. And so I'll speak really personally, and I'm seeing, and I really strongly believe these are just like the benefits that can accrue if you do it. The hard part is doing it. Because what I've discovered, I was on Twitter the other day and somebody put up this very funny tweet, like, I always thought if I only had the time, I'd really clean my house. Turned out that wasn't the problem, and meditation can be like that. It's something we hold as an abstract value, which doesn't really lead to much. But if you do it, it can give us a great deal. So what I'm finding is that even in the very classical sense, it's a way of centering. because our energy, our attention tends to go to the past and go to the future, and especially now, the kind of anxiety-driven future. And we're all over the place. And the practice is one of gathering all of that attention, all of that energy, and being able to settle, even if briefly, within the actual methodology of practicing in that way, which we'll get to do a little bit later. There is something you actually referred to a little bit earlier. There's the need to be able to let go gracefully and start over. Often that kind of practice is done with choosing an object, say the feeling of the breath or a mantra or something like that. We settle our attention on that object, and lo and behold, we're gone. We're all over the place. And what we are practicing, one of my teachers once called it exercising the letting go muscle. We're practicing letting go, and we're also practicing some kindness toward ourselves in coming back. And that, I think, may be the biggest life skill I've gotten out of meditation, because what I say at this age is that nothing in life is a straight shot. We go forward, we fall down, we have to get up or let others help us up, we go forward again. Or we have a really big aspiration, we forget it, we have to remember. Just that, learning how to, that's why we call meditation a resilience training sometimes. We just begin again and begin again and begin again. It also something I was kind of referring to a little bit earlier, the practice of mindfulness has helped me be with a whole range of different experiences in a different way. A lot of us reject joyful experiences. In a time like this, we may be feeling especially guilty. I shouldn't be feeling this, some small thing yet. And we need that sense of renewal and kind of upliftment. Certainly many of us, and I will definitely include myself, have a very distorted relationship to painful feeling. It shouldn't be here. We had shame. We had a sense of isolation. It's only me. We had endless projection into the future. This is the only thing I'll ever feel. And I currently use mindfulness the way I've always used mindfulness, which is to open up to everything that is happening, thoughts, feelings, sensations, but with a little more spaciousness. That doesn't mean icy distance, it means spaciousness. And then very profoundly, I found meditation, and this is one of the biggest ironies because it looks like the most solitary activity of all. It's about connection. It's about connecting in a deeper way to ourselves and connecting to others. And even before all of this, I was fascinated by what seemed to be an epidemic of loneliness that many people in many countries were describing. And the resolution didn't seem to be, well, I've only got 2 friends, I need 8 or something like that. It was about a sense of being connected. And that, even all alone and, eyes closed, in coming closer to myself, I find that I feel much closer to others.
When you were describing one of the emphasis of Buddhism being with all of your feelings, which I found so refreshing. I wasn't raised with a religion. I think when I got to college, I ended up studying it because it was fascinating from a perspective of storytelling, not of a metaphysical truth. One thing that I love about Buddhism particularly is that there is some metaphysics in there, but the teachings are really about grounded and being in the moment. But I've also been thinking the last few weeks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, how that it's really hard to get to self-realization or self-actualization if you're not paying your rent. And so, and I think this is something that a lot of listeners right now are really wondering, specific to what's happening with this pandemic. What benefits do you think meditation and mindfulness bring to this situation?
Well, I think it's everything I described, just being able to get a little more centered. And I in no way think it, eliminates the, drastically terrible things that are happening for people in every level. And so it's not that at all, but somehow the things we might tend to add nonetheless I shouldn't be feeling what I'm feeling, or I am the only one, or this will never, ever, 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 ever change. It just doesn't help. And so one of the interesting pieces of research I think about meditation has to do with some of the research that was done in bringing mindfulness to the military. And one of the things that they found was an increase in executive function, which means like clarity of decision making and thought. And even for people, I mean, it's a pretty controversial program in a lot of ways for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things that some of the researchers point out is that if you have a situation where someone's under tremendous stress and they are tremendously subject to fight and flight, and they're overwhelmed, that's when you get more likely you get things like massacres, because somebody sees a shadow and they just jump at it. What they mean by executive function is a kind of more discerning, critical decision making. There's more clarity, and that doesn't hurt, even in situations of extraordinary stress, because at some point we have to take action in some way. And the better perspective we have and the more we can see layers of what's happening, the better off we are.
That was a great comparison. I mean, yoga played such an important role in the military in India for so long, and people don't always make that connection the way that it's connected with the wellness industry in America, but that's a very important role that it's played. People have asked me over the years about my relationship or what my practice is for if I'm reaching for happiness. Can I be happy? And I always say, santosha, which is contentment, of course. And, the chasing of happiness is sometimes going to make you less resilient against pain, as you mentioned. But there is still an element of happiness that you said joyous, that we can seek. So from your perspective, what is real happiness and how do we get there?
Well, it's funny because the book originally came out 10 years ago. So we revised all the science and updated it, and I wrote some new meditations. And so it really is kind of a new edition, but it brought me back to the days when it first came out, when that was not, frankly, the original title. The book was going to be called Why Meditate, because that's what it's about. And then I got an advanced copy of a friend of mine, Matthew Ricard. I got an advanced copy of his next book, which was called Why Meditate. So we quickly had to come up with another title. And the publisher came up with Real Happiness. And at first I was a little bit uncertain, because I thought I'm going to get into trouble for this. And sure enough, but on the other hand, I thought this is what we actually want. We want something that is not broken as circumstances shatter or change even. We want something that can sustain us in the most difficult time. We want some sense of wholeness. And if I was going to describe myself as an 18-year-old, which was how old I was when I went to India, in one word, I would have said fragmented. And what I craved, although I didn't have the words for it, was some sense of wholeness, some sense of integration in my being. And that's what I'm calling happiness, not being giddy or, delighted by everything that's coming by or enjoying it even, but some real sense of wholeness, and something is intact no matter how much is falling apart. And that is something we can reach. And I think it's why people have that sense of, that also now not such a common used image, but it used to be very, very common where if you're on an airplane and you hear the safety announcements and the flight attendant says, if the oxygen mask should happen to descend, before you try to help someone else, put your own oxygen mask on first. And so what is it we need? We need something going, right? Otherwise we feel depleted, we're exhausted, we feel burnt out, we're overcome. We can't help anybody else. We can't reach out or let others reach out to us. So I really think of that sense of, okay, something restorative, something whole inside of me that's going to let me help others. That's what I call real happiness.
Hmm. Now, let me preface this question by saying on your website, there is a wonderful COVID-19 resource page with meditations and links and all sorts. That's wonderful that you did that. But for someone, say, who is trying to find some peace of mind, maybe some happiness during this time, what kind of program would you recommend for a beginner's meditation practice at this moment?
I think there's some alternatives, and I think it's worth experimenting to see what seems right to you. I practice a lot, and I teach a lot of loving kindness meditation, which is offering a sense of paying attention differently to others through the silent repetition of certain phrases. May you be peaceful, may you be safe, may you be well, whatever it is. And it's funny because I was reading some guided meditations online the other day. They were being recorded, and in the classical loving kindness meditation, because that's what I'm talking about, we go through different categories where we make that offering to ourselves, to someone we really care about who's helped us. And then we come to this category known as a neutral person, somebody we don't strongly like or dislike. And the instruction has always been choose someone who plays some role in your life, because you're likely to run into them now and then, and you'll just get to see if the sense of connection is changing. And the example we've all been using for like 40 years is like the checkout person in the supermarket. So I was reading this and I thought, oh, wait a minute, they're not so neutral anymore. Now they're like heroes. Like, whoa, wait a minute. But that kind of practice, bringing to mind those you love, you may not be seeing right now, physically, and just doing that. That's one. And then a very simple breath meditation, I think, is incredibly valuable because it's something we can also draw on. Like if you sit 5 to 10 minutes a day in a formal way, we say rest your attention on the feeling of the breath. Your mind goes everywhere. You remember that's okay. You can let go and come back. Then you have like a really difficult phone call. And you can remind yourself, just take a few breaths. Because of course, one of the things we stop doing when we're in fight, flight, or freeze is we stop breathing. And you can just remind yourself, like, just take 3 breaths. It's okay. Or you've watched too much news, and you start to feel the panic. Say, okay, let me just breathe. So I think that's another useful one.
Yeah, parasympathetic tone is everything.
That's right. That's right.
So one more question for me, and then we're going to open up. I got some audience questions coming in, but this one is especially pertinent to me as well. But I am now sharing about 1,000 square foot apartment with my wife and 3 cats. Being we're self-isolating, I'm here all the time. We're navigating it pretty well, but I've gotten texts from people who are having more trouble, and on social media you can find it. So what advice would you give for couples who are trying to navigate this space together like this?
I mean, I think it's sort of an interesting arrangement, right? To have a sense of let's make an agreement, that I'm doing this, you're not going to be asking for my attention, or I need this hour to do yoga, or just to be quiet, and then just renegotiate. Have it. I mean, I have sort of the opposite situation. I have a house here in Barre, Massachusetts, where I am now. I have a little studio apartment in New York City, and I left there over 3 weeks ago, and I came up here, but I'm living in a house as though we're a studio apartment. It's like I'm sleeping in my study, the bed's behind me, behind that screen, Every once in a while I think, wait a minute, there's like a whole house, like get out of here. You can spread your wings. The way we use space and what we're accustomed to is very funny to look at. But I think we just have to, I am alone, but I think when you're not alone, it's an interesting negotiation to sort of respect each other.
Yeah, and it does definitely shows you the boundaries of your relationship. I mean, it's been informative in a good way, in a very good way. But the first question I'm coming from the audience Q&A is, what does wholeness mean? You mentioned you wanted a sense of wholeness, but what are you implying by that?
I think, the kind of casual or conventional reflection of fragmentation is a sense of role identification that we have, where our lives can be so compartmentalized. We don't have a sense necessarily of who we are or what our values are. We don't feel that sensibility much because we're just in reaction to what's coming at us. And we feel divided. Like my favorite example of that is probably I was teaching at a yoga center in New York and talking about loving kindness, and which doesn't mean you like everybody or even anybody, but that you have a sense of connection. That, I mean, if anything comes out of this, should be a great appreciation of the fact that our lives are all connected.
Mm.
You know, that what happens over there doesn't nicely stay over there. It comes over here, and what we do and where we put our energy and what we care about, it matters because it too will ripple out. So I was teaching loving kindness, and somebody raised her hand and she said, I feel filled with loving kindness for all beings everywhere as long as I'm alone. But once I'm with others, it's really rough. And everybody laughed because we knew what she meant. But it could be the other way around. I feel fine when I'm with others and I feel very ill at ease being alone, which would be tough right now, you know? So our lives can be very divided, and we can kind of bring that disparate energy together. And that's what I mean by wholeness.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned the Beatles before. I think of all the lonely people. Where do they all come from in the middle of New York City, right? The second question, well, let me just also say the one word that came up the first week when the isolation started was interconnectedness. That really, one of the Buddhist concepts that really, I think, in an individualized culture like America, I think that now we recognize how important that concept is. That was...
Yeah.
Came up. What do you suggest to someone who is overwhelmed with work and is trying to find a balance between work and play?
I'm a great fan of structure. I know not everybody is, but I'm very supported by structure. I see, like, for example, in terms of meditation practice, some teachers, my own teachers, for example, would say you need to practice every day. And this doesn't mean 8 hours a day. Science actually says 7 to 9 minutes a day. But it's some formal period where you're not also trying to think of something else. And I realize that it's easier for me to have a daily commitment than to say, oh, I'll just do it 3 times a week. Because if I was doing it 3 times a week, it would be Monday. And I think, oh, I'll start on Wednesday. And then on Wednesday, I think, well, I'll wait till the weekend, you know. But if it's every day, it's every day. And so those moments which you've decided on beforehand, I am not going to be sitting in this same chair, you know, now reading Twitter where I've been on 18 Zoom calls, you know. I'm going to get up. And that's my promise, you could say, to myself, that there are going to be just periods where I'm doing something different, and we feel better for it. I mean, that's a little hard to believe sometimes with the kind of cultural values we have, but there's something about stepping back. There's something about taking a break. There's something about having a sense of restoration, which actually helps us do more. You know, we've got to have that. Otherwise, it's like the system just runs down.
Yeah, one thing I wonder about during this time period is if people are going to recognize how little they actually needed in terms of material items at this point. I think that's something that can really come out of this moment. Hopeful, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's terrible as it is and fearful. Some very powerful changes may come out of this moment.
Yeah, I think that's inevitable, and we'll see. But we have a few minutes left here, so viewers, if you have any questions, please send them over so I can get them in. But the next one from a viewer is it possible to remain meditative 24/7, or can it only be practiced when you sit quietly in a corner?
It depends on what you mean by meditative, but I think you can be mindful. If not 24/7, you can return to it quicker And there are even some studies these days. One that I was a part of, that one was done by Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina, talking about not that formal period of meditation, but what we sometimes call short moments many times, saying, I'm going to take 3 breaths before I pick up the phone, or before I press send on an email, or I'm going to drink a cup of tea mindfully, not multitasking, not also checking my email, not also on a conference call, but just drinking the cup of tea, feeling the warmth of the teacup, smelling the tea, tasting the tea. And she found a lot of changes happening for people, beneficial changes just from that as well. So definitely we can introduce it and kind of punctuate our activities with mindfulness, and it would be to our benefit. We'd feel more fulfilled, we'd feel more connected, we'd feel more aware. I hesitate with the idea of like maintaining something or it being static, or because we're not going to have it. And people often ask me, how can I be mindful all day long? And I say, you won't be, but you can start over, right? You can, I mean, I once did a hatha yoga retreat with a teacher, and everyone else in the retreat was, brilliant at asana, at postures, and also knew the Sanskrit names for everything. And he got up and did this demonstration once, and sort of right in the middle of it, he made this kind of funny movement, and then he went on. So he got out of the pose and he said to everybody, what just happened? And everyone except me came forward with, oh, you did part in Sanskrit, you did part of that asana, and then you switched to that asana. So he looked at me and he said, what happened? And I said, I think you fell. And he said, you're right, I fell. And he said, but that I started over. That's good yoga.
Yes, yes.
So
That is one thing I tell my students all the time. I teach a pretty rigorous class, and it's challenging, but I tell them it doesn't matter if you never do these poses. It's what happens when you see the pose. Is your initial reaction no? Or is it, well, let's see what happens, which it doesn't have to be yes, but that's that open-mindedness, right? This is an interesting question, and actually I say we can scratch it, but I actually find it fascinating, so I'm going to ask it. I've read that practicing meditation in scary places like haunted houses and graveyards could strengthen your meditation practice. I lived on a graveyard in Jersey City for a year and I loved it. And then the questioner is saying, I was thinking of finding a place like that to practice. Is it worth it?
well, I think you got it. I don't think you need to go and look for another place. Here we are, I mean, we're in a place where getting your mail can seem dangerous. It's like threatening, and it can be strengthening. We don't always use difficult circumstance, or the prospect of illness or death or things that are very real. We don't always use them to our benefit. We're taught not to, right? Like so much of what we try to do in this society at any rate is like a totem against change, to acquire enough, to accumulate enough, never going to have to die, whatever. And it's just so untrue and kind of unfair to ourselves. So to come closer to the reality of things that do scare us can be incredibly strengthening, because it liberates us from all that avoidance. We have much greater compassion for ourselves. We have much greater compassion for others, because who is exempt? Really, nobody, right? And so it can be a very powerful practice. But honestly, we're there. We're in the charnel ground.
Well, exactly. I was thinking that there's a reason Shiva hung out in the funeral parlors and the graveyards. Okay. Work is often meditative for me in that when I am in action, I am not overthinking. I am engaged. When I am not working, I think too much and can get paralyzed. Is there a way to connect to meditation? Is there a way to connect meditation with action? can meditation be directed in that it gets me to act more and be engaged more?
I think in terms of the latter, meditation does get us more active. I know one of the great um, confusions about meditation practice, or even the word mindfulness, is that it can seem so passive and so complacent. And I think that's because of the way it's generally defined, which is accurate, but also misleading. So you hear mindfulness defined as being aware of what's happening without judgment, which doesn't mean without discernment, but it means without kind of a harsh, immediate judgment. You hear mindfulness defined as accepting things the way that they are. And I mean, once I was, and it's not untrue, but what does it imply to us? I was once teaching somewhere, and very often at the beginning of a session, before we come to say awareness of the breath, we say, let's just sit and listen to sound. Now, I know in a place like New York City right now, that's very difficult because of all the sirens. And I've also taught an active duty soldier in Iraq. It was very difficult. But in general, it's just a way of opening to an experience that is coming and going. So I was in some room and I began the meditation. And as soon as I got that far, let's sit and listen to sound, somebody raised their hand and said, well, what if it's the sound of the smoke alarm going off? Should I sit here mindfully knowing that the smoke alarm is going off? Or should I get up? And I said, I'd get up, But I understood the question, because doesn't it sound that way? I'm going to accept things the way that they are. I'm going to, but it doesn't mean it's not a dynamic relationship where we're learning and we're seeing. And yes, you can meditate in an active form. There's walking meditation. There's something like yoga. You can bring mindfulness into any activity. I think it would be interesting too, if you choose to just sit sometimes, to work with developing more spaciousness to the thoughts, because we're not trying to cut them off or make them go away, but have it, we don't have to take every thought to heart and build a whole self-image about it. We also don't have to feel ashamed of what we're thinking, or excessive harsh self-criticism. Why am I thinking that? I shouldn't be thinking that. But more learning how to let things come and go, which I think would stand us in good stead.
This question, interesting, 2 questions on the same topic, and I think they're meant for Stephen Batchelor, but I think we'll get your perspective. It's about, can I be a theistic Buddhist? Meaning, can I believe in God and still practice Buddhist meditation?
Yes. My first teacher was S.N. Goenka. This is when I went to India. So this is my first meditation retreat, which was my first instruction, was January 1971. And the first night of that retreat, Goenka said, the Buddha did not teach Buddhism. The Buddha taught a way of life. So this is in no way about becoming a Buddhist or rejecting anything else. It's about the power of awareness and what they believe are very good methods, very direct methods for enhancing that power for anybody who wants to use them. So when we first opened the retreat center, the Insight Meditation Society, which was in 1976, Father Thomas Keating was the abbot, a very close by Trappist abbey, and he was very interested and liberal, and many of the Trappist monks would come and sit. And it was always quite fun to look out on a group of people, and the monks are in their robes, and occasionally there'd be a rabbi with his thing on, and really I believe in that. I believe that these are just, it's almost like universal truths, and the way those methods were maintained and offered within the Buddhist context made them very available, and that's wonderful.
Would you recommend businesses incorporating meditation into the workplace? And have you seen businesses already doing this?
I have seen several businesses doing this. And I've seen some government offices doing this. I've seen NGOs do this. I've seen um, organizations like domestic violence shelters doing this. I've seen it in the classroom. It's a very interesting process. In terms of business, um, I think it's very helpful. It's I mean, because people are people, right? And things can be very stressful, and feeling um, one of the greatest sources of happiness, they say, at work is a sense of meaning. And the meaning may not be in the job description, it's in the um, perhaps in the quality we're bringing to it. And so I've known people with like jobs that I didn't necessarily think would appeal to me at all, like being a person uh, answering calls in a call-in center where people are fielding customer complaints, you know. And this one woman, for example, said to me, "I love everybody. You know, I can't always help them. By the time they get to me, they've been blown off by like three people. They're incensed. But should I respect everybody? I'm always honest. If I can't help them, I say so." Um, and I thought, wow, I've been a complaining customer. I don't remember getting someone like you, you know. Uh, and so maybe people resolve to make a difference, whatever their particular role is, and feel a kind of fulfillment. I think it's very real.
To follow up on that, this is my own question, but I did an article on this for Big Think actually a number of years ago, which was making the questioning the idea of, say, Google having mindfulness in their workplace. When you had a company that is built on what Cal Newport called a distraction technology, and there are other people who've talked about it that way, teaching their workers to be mindful. And I don't want to call it a specific company, it's not really appropriate here, but that just happened to be what the article was on. But how, if you work in technology and you work in an environment where it's about keeping people shuffling through pages as quickly and keeping their attention, is mindful possible there? Mindfulness.
I think mindfulness could be possible. First of all, things can change, right? And how much change comes from the ground up, I don't know, you know. But I know there's a lot of pushback, and people say that, you know, you shouldn't bring mindfulness into these companies. Some people say that uh, because it's like pablum or something, you know, you're teaching people to be more content in an unfair situation. But I don't think it works that way. Plus, I've never once gone into a company and had somebody say to me, "Can you please help me be more soulless so I can be more productive, you know, and get more done?" Everybody, everywhere, will say something like, "I can't sleep," or "I'm worried about my child," or "I have an alcoholic brother who's, you know, not getting better," or it's life. And I just don't see the reason why these tools shouldn't be offered.
Hmm. Good answer. And I agree. Last question, and then we're going to go to your meditation. This is a really nice one. I've been doing a 45-minute guided body scan meditation. Every so often, something happens almost like falling asleep, but I'm not. I'm not consciously hearing, but really am hearing. Is this common?
Yes, it is common, and there are different aspects to it. We always talk about how meditation will deepen calm and peace and concentration, at the same time strengthen energy and alertness and aliveness. And those don't always happen in total balance. And so sometimes when the concentration side of things is stronger, there'll be an experience like that. Um, it's okay. It's wonderful. And it's something that uh, if it deepened, if it went on for a very long time, you'd probably want to work with picking up your energy some.
Mm. I would also just add in that yoga nidra is a wonderful practice if you're in playing with that sort of meditation, to
Yeah.
whoever asked that question. Yeah. Well, thank you for all of these wonderful answers, Sharon. It would be wonderful if you can do a short meditation for the listeners right now.
I shall. That's wonderful. Thank you. lie down. Um, Close your eyes if you feel at ease with that. It's fine to keep them open, just a little bit open. So you can sit comfortably or lie down if you prefer. Close your eyes or not. It's fine to keep them open. If they're open, you can have them be a little partially open, and just relax. See if you can find the place where the breath is strongest for you or clearest for you. And this is just the normal, natural breath in this system. Maybe it's the nostrils or the chest or the abdomen. Find that place, bring your attention there, and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. Without concern for what's already gone by, without leaning forward for even the very next breath, just this one. And if images or sounds or sensations or emotions should arise, but they're not all that strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. But if something really big takes you away, you get lost in thought, spun out in a fantasy, or you fall asleep, don't worry about it, truly. We say the most important moment is the next moment after you've been gone, after you've been lost. Because that's the moment we have the chance to be really different. Instead of judging ourselves or blaming ourselves, we practice letting go and we practice beginning again. You can just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. We say the healing is in the return, not in never having wandered to begin with. No matter how many times you have to let go and begin again, it's fine. And when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. We'll end the meditation.
All right. Thank you again, Sharon, for this. I appreciate everything you do. I've appreciated you for a long time, but it's nice to finally get an opportunity to talk with you like this. And for those of you, thank you for everyone who tuned in. And if you enjoyed this webinar, this Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern, there will be a conversation with Deepak Chopra. So tune in for that. And again, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care, everyone.